I guess I should say I'm Kevin Roberts with Project 2025, and I'm here to help. Which is a way of saying, and I will answer your question, my friend, if the radical left, which has mischaracterized everything about what we're trying to do, thinks that we're going to roll over, they've got another thing coming.
And Kevin Roberts is the president of the Heritage Foundation, which is a think tank in Washington, where I used to work. And, I'll just be totally blunt with you as someone who lived in DC for 35 years and then fled hair on fire to a much purer place because I have contempt for the city and I think it's disgusting. And I really mean that from the bottom of my heart. I do, I really mean that. And I don't just mean the culture, I mean the individual people who live there. And I would know. Anyway, so I don't think a lot of DC think tanks, but Heritage is an exception in my mind. And the reason that it is that they are totally sincere about what they're trying to do, which is to improve the country. And governance is very complicated. In fact, it's so complicated that despite spending my entire life around it, I still don't really understand how all the federal agencies work or how a bill becomes a law. Schoolhouse Rock comes into my mind. Every time I'm just a bill. Okay, if you're laughing, you're over 40. You get all the Gilligan's Island references too, I get it, okay. So, but in any case, Heritage is the place that makes it its job to actually understand it, not in just broad terms, thematic terms, but in the precise terms necessary to make things better. And it looks like Trump's gonna win, if I'm being totally honest. I mean, it does. And who knows, it's 6 weeks out, but I spoke to, you can never trust anyone in politics, but there are a couple, truly, but there are a couple people I do trust, one in particular I just talked to yesterday about the real polls, not the polls designed to lie to you and convince you of things, but the internal polls that they use to make real decisions. And he's up in every swing state, and by big margins, including in Arizona, which is amazing to me. So, all things being equal, Donald Trump will win. But then there's a lot that happens after that. Like his sentencing, this whole thing is so nuts, for the fake crimes. But one thing that will definitely happen if Trump is elected, and I think he will be, is that a lot of people are gonna come to Washington with the expectations of hundreds of millions of Americans weighing on them to fix this. The system is corrupt. I just forget, bottom line in one sentence, it's corrupt. It exists for the benefit of the people who pay for it and not for the people who are ruled by it, which is us. And that's disgusting and wrong, and everyone knows it. The whole thing is like, Jeffrey Epstein thrived in DC for a reason, right? I mean, the whole thing is gross, and everybody knows that. But how do you fix it? What do you actually do? Now, my job for years has been to complain about it, which is super easy. I don't know what you're saying, but I agree with you too. I shouldn't have mentioned Epstein. He was killed. But anyway, he was. But Kevin Roberts is the guy who's actually thought this through. And I thought it'd be really interesting just to sit down for 10 minutes and ask, when and if Trump wins, how do you make the system non-corrupt? What do you actually do? I think this will be really interesting. So with that, Kevin Roberts, ladies and gentlemen. I love you too. So Kevin, I will just stand back and get your view of what if Trump wins. What are the first things that the incoming administration should do to return this to a country based on the rule of law and fairness?
Imagine that goal. That's great. I guess I should say I'm Kevin Roberts with Project 2025, and I'm here to help. Which is a way of saying, and I will answer your question, my friend, if the radical left, which has mischaracterized everything about what we're trying to do, thinks that we're going to roll over, they've got another thing coming. And the reason for that is, you look at this audience, and many of you are Heritage friends, thank you for that. Most of all, most importantly, these folks, Tucker, love this country. And the motivation The motivation for what Heritage does, and many groups on the right, is that we're trying to restore the American dream. And so if Mr. Trump and Mr. Vance win, knowing that they're going to make these decisions, right? So there's no presumption on our part about what their priorities are. I can report to you on behalf of these folks and the rest of common sense, normal Americans, that the first thing that these people would ask for is for the southern border to be closed 100%.
Amen.
And illegal aliens, which is what they are by our Constitution. Nothing against them as human persons, but they are illegal aliens. They must be cut off from government benefits immediately.
It's so crazy you even have to say that.
It is a bit surreal. And the reason we want to do that isn't just the obvious, it's that the presence of this problem has created lawlessness in other places, like Aurora, Colorado, of all places. The amazing thing, too, is that this is a very popular first priority across the political spectrum. So as a policy priority, it's very popular. The second thing that we would do is unleash American energy. You know, I grew up in a working class family in an oil and gas state, Louisiana. I'm an adopted Texan, as you know. I know many of you. We wear these things we call boots, but in my family we call them shoes. And what we know is that when you unleash American energy, it benefits real hardworking Americans in places like where I grew up in Pennsylvania, but it benefits all of us. This really interesting thing happened in the Trump administration. We unleashed American energy, to President Trump's credit, and there were no wars started. We had more national security as a result of having energy security. And the second thing that happened is that we weren't paying as much at the grocery store, obviously at the gas pump, for our electric bills, and we weren't shipping away American sovereignty to the Chinese Communist Party, which benefits from this. So imagine that. You and I both share a great passion for fly fishing and hunting. We've done one of those together, and we would consider ourselves, I think I can speak for you, conservationists, which is totally in line with being ideological conservatives. And so when we talk about unleashing American energy, for people who might say, well, what about the environment? I think you and I, Tucker, would be the first conservatives to say it's better for the environment because the biggest polluter on the planet is China. Why are we giving them our jobs and our sovereignty? Sorry to get a little wound up here, but
but I mean, you drive through the West, and where I live in the far east as you can go, and you see the natural landscape destroyed in the way that strip mining once did for renewable energy products that don't create real energy. And the mountains, right where I live, they cut the tops off all the mountains to put Canadian windmills up there. And the only question that we have in my town is, can you take one out with a 308 or does it take a 50 BMG? And this is like a very intense conversation among my neighbors, not because they're against windmills, but because they're against destroying nature, because that's all they have is beauty created by God, and a bunch of people who've never even been outside and could identify 3 bird species and don't know deciduous from a conifer, who know nothing about nature, have wrecked nature in the name of some theory so they can make China rich. It's like disgusting.
For all of those reasons, that's why that idea is popular too across the political spectrum. The third thing that we would encourage any policymaker to do is, and I think that we can say this will be a policy priority of a Trump-Vance administration, is that when they get to Washington, D.C., they correct the abuses and overreach of the American administrative state. You've said often, I've said it often, many of our heritage scholars have said it often, if a government, an administrative state, can abuse its power and persecute and prosecute a former president, that can and does happen to any of us. Pro-life grandmothers, my friend Mark Houck, those of us who just, as you said, are trying to bring order to chaos. We live on the cusp of this great republic being an intellectual totalitarian state. And the real weapon of power there is the administrative state. So from the Department of Justice across the department, we need to reduce the number of federal employees. There are nearly 3 million employees for the federal government. There are, hold on to your seats, 24 million Americans who work for federal, state, or local government. Nothing against them as people. It might be some of you in this room. The point is that since the late 1970s, that number has doubled, and it tells you what the problem is, which is that as Congress has abrogated its power to oversee the administrative state has grown at whose expense? Yours, mine, and that of everyone in this room. And so we have to understand that's what the battle in DC is about. And I'm sorry to report to you that it isn't just progressive Democrats and the radical left and the Biden-Harris regime that we have to fight on this. It is the elite establishment that includes some DC Republicans.
So what, I mean, it was just so interesting. Last night, we had, Bobby Kennedy, we're about to have Tulsi Gabbard. Both of them were, longtime Democrats. Both have endorsed Trump. Both mean it. Both have explained why. And I bet you $20 that both would be much more welcome in this audience than, say, Mitch McConnell, the snapping turtle who runs the... And you sort of wonder, how can there... there's so many great people in the Republican Party, but at the level of leadership, a lot of them are repulsive and very liberal. They're voting for Kamala Harris, actually. How'd that happen?
It happened because of political cowardice, but secondly, it happened because it's more important for them to play DC than it is to actually govern on behalf of the American people. And the real gist of the work we do at Heritage, of Project 2025, which includes, I should say, 111 organizations, is that we're trying to break the power of the elites in DC and New York and the left coast, which leads me to the fourth priority I would recommend. And as a fifth-generation educator, this is close to my heart. In fact, the first national TV interview I did was with you. I was president of a small college in Wyoming that was being attacked by Obama and Biden. And we said, we're not taking your student loans and grants. We're not signing on to your Obamacare. Go pound sand. And you were kind enough to interview me. A know-nothing college president of this little college. But it led me to this. We have to eliminate, root and branch, the U.S. Department of Education.
So, last question. I just so vehemently agree with everything that you said, and I think any normal person from any background or any party what would you disagree with in what you just said? No normal person could. But everybody in Washington does, because they're all snorting and snarfing at the trough. And they would have to get real jobs and learn to fix my AC if you did what you say needs to be done, and you're absolutely right. So how tough would an administration have to be to actually pull that off?
They've got to have spines of steel. And the way that they will have spines of steel, if I can mention this not just to you, but everyone here, everyone watching, is that those of us who work in DC, like all of us at Heritage, but who are not of DC, go to work every day with two mindsets, but they're very connected. The first is we're sons and daughters of Jesus Christ, so we're here for a higher purpose. So, New York Times, Washington Post, send your slings and arrows to us. If we're catching flack, we're over the target. But the second thing is that we are working behind enemy lines on behalf of the American people. And that attitude is, and I am an optimist, because of my faith, but I can tell you also from my few years leading Heritage, there are many good men and women behind enemy lines, and they need you, all of you in this audience, you, Tucker, I will say, not gratuitously, to keep pounding the drums that we've got a small time, a really narrow window of opportunity to take back this American Republic. I happen to think we're on the cusp of doing it.
I hope you're right. Kevin Roberts of the Heritage Foundation. Thank you. I forgot that.
The Kevin Roberts Show is brought to you by more than 10 million supporters of the Heritage Foundation. The executive producer is Crystal Kate Bonham. Sound design by Lauren Evans, Mark Guiney, Tim Kennedy, and Joseph von Spakovsky. For more information and to subscribe, please visit heritage.org.